Hi there and welcome to this little tutorial for drawing trees 6 different ways using a sort of line and wash technique. So the first version is what I would call the shaggy tree, where you use a kind of continuous line method, creating irregular shaggy sort of shapes, and then differentiate between those different shapes using some different colours. Obviously, normally with watercolour you would start with very light dilute washes and then increase to more deeper and pigmented colours. But one of the nice things about line and wash as a technique is it's really fast. Now you can just put one wash in and then lift a little bit out with tissue, and it saves you having to create different dilutions of washes. So always have some tissue on hand when you're doing watercolours, a particularly line and wash technique, because it is quite fast and it's quite, well, it can get a bit messy. So version 2 are like sort of blobby spherical trees. You see these types of trees used a lot in architectural renderings and drawings. If you look up architectural drawing and trees, you'll see some really interesting examples of how architects and architectural artists do trees and render them, and yeah, you can get some really interesting ideas. Again, what I've done here is, as the trees get into the distance, I've just used a little bit of a lighter colours and lifted out a little bit of colour with tissue paper to give the idea of perspective. So I think this technique of round, more blobby trees really makes whatever subject you're drawing, in this case the church, really stand out more, because the trees become less detailed and less part of the image in a way. It's quite a nice technique, and if you were doing a big landscape, lots and lots of detailed trees might get a little bit too much. So for a big panorama, these round trees I think work better. So the third version is a kind of combination between the first two, where the trees are roughly round, but they have a sort of slightly segmented or serrated feel with a little bit of branch detail sketched in. The real master of this type of technique is Ken Young Line and Wash on Instagram, and have a look at the way he does foliage. It's really tremendous, and I've stolen a little bit of that idea here. What I've also done is the trees, as they disappear into the background, I've made them a bit softer again, and I've also put in a little bit of drops of clean water just to create some highlights and some blooms in the tops of the trees. The shadow here, what I've used is Moon Glow, which is a Daniel Smith colour, and I've just dragged it across to create a bit of a shadow effect on this quite rough paper. Technically, shadows should always have some colour, so I mean, if they were on grass, say, there would be a darker green rather than a black or a grey tone. But Moon Glow is quite an interesting colour in itself, because it does tend to granulate slightly when it dries into different pigments like blues and purples, and it will pick up sort of colours that are around it, particularly if you're working quite wet in wet. In other words, you're merging one wet layer up against another wet layer, and then those two things, they will combine. So the fourth version is a little lighthouse with the sort of trees that have been silhouetted. I've put this in really just to show that you don't actually need to do anything other than just use one colour. You don't need multiple colours, you don't need multiple washes, you can just use a single colour to create what is a little bit of a sort of silhouette effect. The shadow under the trees has been created with a little bit of cross hatching, and these trees here, you can see I've used quite a geometric, almost boxy shape to them. We've done the round trees already, so you can combine those with the more pointed conifers and some of the more boxy shape for deciduous. I think it works quite nicely. So the fifth example has all gone a bit crazy. This is just, I think some of these the choices of the colours are a bit wrong here, but it doesn't matter. The technique is that I'm saying you don't have to use specific colours or realistic colours. You can just chuck a lot of paint on, let it all merge. You can see where the shadow on the bottom has been wet, and it's pulled all that pigment from the trees down into it, and you get these beautiful mixes of colour. There's lots of really good artists on Instagram who use very wet in wet techniques for urban sketching, and this technique of working very, very wet and mushing everything together, you can get some beautiful effects. I've also splatted some pigment over the top of this all, and that's really just to say that this isn't a mistake, this is the style of the picture. You're doubling down on that messiness. I often think with these very wet in wet techniques, it's nice to really go for it, and then you get you can make a real statement. So finally, with this little tractor image, this is probably, I would say, an average of all these techniques in a way, and this is probably the way I would work normally, where the trees are a mixture of geometric and soft clouder shapes, and I would do some of them as overall outlines to pull them forward, and then trees that are a bit further back, I would put maybe an outline around two of them together. If you look at where the tractor is, you can see those two trees have just been done as one, and then I've just separated them with colours, and then you again use some moon glow underneath as a little bit of shadow. I've also added in a little bit of just clean water into some of the washes to create a bloom and a bit of a highlight on tops of the trees, and then I've put a second layer of pigment with a bit more blue in and dotted that down to create a bit of shadow underneath the trees, as if you're trying to describe a more spherical sort of form. Well, I hope that's been useful for you. This has been a really quick demo just to say that really you can do whatever you want. You can make trees with paint them with your fingers, you can do circular trees, you can just do big blobs. It really doesn't matter, just express yourself. And I would say that if you're learning any technique, one of the best ways of doing that is getting a big sheet of paper and doing it again and again and again and again, and it really frees you up from any sense of investing a lot of time in a single piece that puts pressure on your shoulders. You can just rinse and repeat, and then have a look back and go, well, that worked, or I like that, wasn't quite so keen on that. But yeah, and the main thing is just have fun, and you will learn more from your mistakes than you will learn from your successes. Okay, have fun. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time. Okay, bye bye.